All right, so finally we're getting to what is the actual point. So we're jumping over to that foldable. What is the actual point of doing these trig ratios and using them? So why do we need to learn about them? So these trig ratios, these can actually help you find missing sides of a triangle. So if you're back in your foldable now, you want to jump over there. We're going to take a look at number 5 in your foldable together. We're going to actually look at 5 and 6. So let's look at 5 first here. If we look at this, what we've got is we've got 3 parts in this triangle. Now, to do right triangle trig, you always need 3 parts. Let's look at the 3 parts we got. We got the angle here. That's our angle, 15 degrees. We got 2 sides. We got this x and we got that 12. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow a quick process here to figure out how to do this problem. The first thing is identify your angle. That's the first thing I do with right triangle trig. Identify the angle. Then what I do, second step, after I identify the angle, I'm going to identify the sides. So what I mean by that is label, is it opposite, adjacent, hypotenuse from that angle we identified in step 1. So let's do that. So here's my angle 15. So my sides, I got this side. So if I drew a line from this angle to that side, that must be the opposite. And then I'm going to look at 12 and say, okay, well, 12's right next to my 15. It's not the hypotenuse because it's not opposite that right angle. So this being next to my 15 must be the adjacent side. Okay, so I've identified the angle, I've identified the sides I've given. So identify the sides given. And then finally, step 3 is going to be pick the trig function that we want to use. Now, you're thinking, well, how am I going to pick a trig function? Well, if I look at the sides that I've identified, the sides that I'm given an opposite and an adjacent. So I'm going to jump back up, and I'm going to look at, well, SOHCAHTOA. SOHCAHTOA. Remember, BROCAHTOA, you got SOHCAHTOA. So if I look back up here, which one of those has an opposite and an adjacent in it? Well, sine's got the opposite, but it doesn't have the adjacent. Cosine's got the adjacent, but it doesn't have the opposite. Tangent has both, opposite and adjacent. So that's how I know which trig function to use. I'm basing it off of this. So I'm picking tangent for this first one because I have opposite and adjacent. So now, step 4, write equation and solve. Okay, so my next step, now that I've identified I need tangent, I'm going to write the equation. Now to write the equation, all you do is you write your trig function, in this case tangent, of, and then remember, with the trig function, you always want to write the angle. So in this case, my angle is 15, so I'm going to write 15 in there. So the tangent of 15 is equal to the opposite, in this case, x, over, and I'm just following this, the adjacent 12. So that's my equation. Now, I need to solve this equation for x. So I need to get x by itself. So let's talk about how we can do that. Okay, so to solve this, again, we want to get x by itself. So what we have to do is look, how is this 12 affecting the x? Well, if you look, the 12 is dividing the x. So to get rid of a divide, you would multiply. So we're going to multiply both sides by 12. So I'm going to put this in parentheses to show that I'm multiplying by it. So when I multiply both sides by 12, those 12s cancel. I'm left with an x on this side. Now on this side, I'm left with 12 times the tangent of 15. So you want to be able to put that in your calculator. So what we want to do is, in our calculators here, we want to be able to put that in. Now, if you don't have a calculator, go ahead and grab one now. Pause the video, go grab a calculator. Okay. Hopefully everybody has a calculator now. So what we need to do is we need to put this into our calculators. So we're going to write exactly as that says. We're going to say 12 times, then we're going to click this tangent button on your calculator. Should be a button there that says TAN for tangent. And then in the parentheses, we're going to write 15. Now, I think on your calculator, you have to close those parentheses, so you would just press that close parentheses button. So now what we have is 12 times the tangent of 15. And now that we've written that in, all we have to do is hit enter. And we are going to get some crazy decimal here. Okay, with most of these problems, you're going to get a decimal, and that's okay. But we need to talk about how we're going to round those decimals. Generally, unless I specify something different, I want you guys to go to that third decimal place. So if we are at 3.215, that's where I want you guys to end, at that third place, that 5. Now, when we end there, we have to look at the fourth digit and say, okay, does that 3 make the 5 round up or stay the same? Well, that 3 makes the 5 stay the same, so I'm just going to have a final answer of 3.215 is equal to x. And that's my final answer right there. All right, so that's the first problem. We've officially done a right triangle trig problem. All that built up, and that's all we needed it for. But you see how that basic skill of identifying the sides and knowing your trig ratios helped us be able to identify or find that missing side. All right, so that's the first one. We're going to come down. We're going to look at 6 together as well, because it's a little different concept, same 4 steps. Solving gets a little different. So let's take a look. Again, first step, identify the angle. So we're going to look at angle. Our angle here is that 71 degrees. So we've done step 1. We found our angle. Step 2, identify the sides given. So if I look 20, well, that is opposite of my angle. So that's opposite. And then the other side, x, well, that's definitely adjacent, but if you look, it's opposite that right angle. The red angle is pointing at it, so this must be my longest side, the hypotenuse. So from there, we've got an opposite and hypotenuse. So we've identified the angle, we've identified the sides given. Now we got to pick a trig function. So I have to look back at my trig functions, my SO, CA, TOA. So that's why it's important that you have that SOHCAHTOA TOA memorized. We want to find one that has opposite and hypotenuse. So if we look at sine, that's opposite and hypotenuse. So that's the trig function we want to use. So we're going to come over here, and we're going to say the sine of our angle, and remember the angle always goes with the trig function. So my angle here is 71. So the sine of 71 is equal to the opposite side, in this case 20, over the hypotenuse x. Now, solving this equation, since we got it now, it's going to be the same thing. We want to get x by itself. The problem is, to get x by itself, it's going to be a little bit of work. Because right now, x is dividing that 20. So normally, we would just do something with the 20 to get away from the x, but we can't because x is the thing that is dividing. So what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of the x on this side. So we're going to take this x and we're going to get rid of it on that side. Then we're going to come over, because we did to this side by multiplying, since it was divided, we multiplied to get rid of it. We're going to multiply by x on this side. So now what we're left with is this. Let's rewrite this line. X times the sine of 71 is equal to 20. All right. So now this is the part that gets a little tricky. We want to get x by itself. Sorry for all the jumping. We want to get x by itself. And what we have right now is x times the sine of 71 is equal to 20. So what I want to get rid of is this times sine of 71. So to get rid of something that's being multiplied, what we need to do is divide. So we're going to divide by the sine of 71. If I'm doing that to this side of the equation, I need to do that same thing to the other side. So I'm going to divide by the sine of 71 on that side. Now this side, it cancels out. That whole thing cancels because we divided by the whole thing. So on this side, I'm left with x. On this side, I'm left with 20 divided by the sine of 71. Now we're going to do the same thing, put this now in our calculators to get a final answer. But we got to pay attention to what we're doing when we put this in the calculator. So again, we're going to write exactly what this says. This says 20, so we're going to put 20 in. Then we're going to hit divided by. Now we're dividing by the sine of 71. So we're going to write that exactly as it is. We're not going to just divide by 71. We're not going to divide by the sine of something else. We're going to literally write exactly what we see. So we see 20 divided by. We're going to press sine. Then we're going to press 71. Now you guys, again, you got to press that close parentheses button. Mine automatically closed on this calculator. But on yours, just press that close parentheses button. So we do that. We solve that and we get 20 divided by the sine of 71 is 21.152. Now again, we want to round to that third decimal. So we go to the fourth and we say, okay, does that 4 make the 2 round up? No, it doesn't. So we get a final answer of 21.152. And that's it. That's our final answer right there. So, key things I want to show you guys, a little shortcut so you don't have to do all this algebra here because that's a lot of writing every time. Did want to show you it so you'd understand it, but it's a lot of algebra. If you notice, if you look at this one, we started with this equation where we had x is equal to the sine of 20, or sine of 71 is equal to 20 over x. And then we ended up with x is equal to the 20 divided by the sine of 71. So if you look at that part, do you see how just the x and the 71 switch places? So if you remember this, anytime the variable's on the bottom, you're just dividing. So if you want to make that note, variable on bottom, divide. Okay. Sorry, variable on bottom, divide the trig function. Okay. Now, the second rule is, if we come up to this number 5, if you notice, all we did, the variable was on top here, so we multiplied that number by the trig function. We did 12 times the trig function, so if variable's on top, multiply by the trig function. Oops. Got to spell multiply right though. All right, so those are your 2 rules there. Follow these 4 steps with every right triangle trig problem. I want you guys to try a couple of the problems 7, 9, and 11, and then we'll be done with practice for today. So go ahead, try those problems 7, 9, and 11. You can use these ones as examples. So I'll leave these up here so you guys can look at those while you're working on 7, 9, 11. Pause, give those a try, and I'll come back with the answers. So here are the answers to those problems. Hopefully you tried them out. Remember, I just followed those 4 steps. Step 1, identify the angle. That's step 1. Step 2, identify the sides. Step 3, pick your trig function. And step 4, write your equation and solve. Remember, if the variable's on the bottom, you divide. And if the variable's on the top, you multiply. So take a look at the 7 and 9 there. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. If not, you can pause, just take a look at them. Then let's take a look at number 11. Number 11, same thing, follow the same 4 steps. 1, identify the angle. 2, identify the sides. 3, identify which trig function. And 4, set up equation and solve. It's the same 4 steps every time. All right, so that is using right triangle trig to find a missing side. So we're going to do a quick recap and we'll be done for the day. So this is the last thing on your note sheet. So if we look on your note sheets here, review and think, let's take a look. It says, what is the sine of x? So same 4 steps. Remember, identify the angle. So here's my angle, x. Based off the angle, identify your sides. We got the opposite here, because that's opposite of x. We got adjacent here, because that's right next to x. And we have the hypotenuse here, that's 15. So I want you guys to do, see if you can answer those 3 questions based off that data. Remember, do all 4 steps just right in a row. Identify your angle, we did that. Identify your sides, do that. Next, pick your trig function. Well, they picked it for you. And then, finally, last step is write your equation. In this case, we're not solving, we're just writing the equation. So go ahead and try those 3, see what you get, and we'll come back and look at them together. Pause now. All right, so let's take a look. Sine of x you should have got to be the opposite over the hypotenuse. So in this case, 12 over 15. And if you wanted to reduce that, I believe 3 goes into both of those, you get 4/5. Cosine of x, same thing. Cosine is, remember, ca, so adjacent over hypotenuse. Write that up here for our sine as well. So adjacent, we said, was 9 over the hypotenuse, 15. And we can reduce both of those by 3. You get 3/5. Now this last one's a little tricky. It says, what is the sine of 90 minus x? So if you guys remember, in a right triangle, we had that corollary that said the 2 acute angles add up to 90. So if this angle is x, if I want to figure out what this one is, wouldn't I just do 90 minus x to get what this angle is? Take a second, think about that. Yeah, it makes sense, right? So this angles are 90 minus x. So if I want to find the sine of this angle, so all that 90 minus x means is this other angle in the triangle. So all I got to do is figure out, well, what is the opposite over the hypotenuse for that angle? So the opposite to that angle is going to be your 9, and the hypotenuse is going to be 15. So the sine of 90 minus x is simply just going to be 9 over 15, or reduced to 3/5. If you guys remember, didn't we say that the cosine of one angle, so the cosine of the x, should be equal to the sine of the other angle? So the cosine of x should be equal to the sine of 90 minus x, and if you look, we got the same answer. So we know we're right. All right, guys, so that's all we're going to do today for right triangle trig. What I want you guys to do is, if you need to, pause, get this down, but then take a look at the rest of those even problems on the foldable. That's going to be your practice for tonight to make sure you got this down and make sure that you're going to ace right triangle trig tomorrow. All right, have a good day, guys.